Please welcome Assistant Secretary of Education, Roberto Rodríguez, in conversation with Editor-in-Chief of The Hill, Bob Cusack.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for showing up, and thank you, Roberto, for joining us today.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay, so we know the big story of the week, the nation's report card. That's actually driving in today and listening to Morning Joe, and Gretchen Whitmer, who's in a high-profile race for re-election, was actually asked about learning during the pandemic, without going into the detail that we were, but clearly this has gotten a lot of attention. It deserves a lot of attention. Right. This new report card clearly has some alarming findings. What's your reaction, and what's the solution both in the short and the long term?
Well, my reaction is just as you said, Bob, it is alarming. I mean, we've been following the NAEP. The nation's report card is one of the most reliable indicators that we have of our national trend, of the direction we're going in as a country. And we've never seen the levels of decline, particularly in 8th grade mathematics, 8 points. You know, it's clear that the effects of learning loss and the effects of lost instructional time of this pandemic spared no zip code. They spared no community, right? We saw declines across the country. So the work now is in building back from that with great urgency, right? How are we focused on helping to support our state and our local leaders in recovering from some of that lost learning time? So we're focused on, accelerating instruction, providing for high dosage tutoring, providing for those strategies around tailored instruction that will help our students succeed and regain that lost ground.
What is your advice to states? And of course, I'm sure all the states and the governors, and I interviewed the governor of Utah yesterday, we'll see that video in a little bit. Right. You know, everyone's looking at their state. But really, the results are not good for any state here. So what kind of advice behind the scenes, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Because obviously this just came out, but the effort will take years to address.
Yeah. Well, Bob, you know, we've been focused since day one as an administration on making sure that we can help be a good partner with our state leaders and our local leaders in safely reopening schools, in addressing some of the academic challenges that stemmed from the pandemic, and in making sure that our students are safe and healthy, addressing their mental health needs. Our state leaders and our local leaders are on the front line of this recovery, and they're putting the American Rescue Plan dollars to work every day to help fuel this recovery. And that's where we see some optimism, right? I think we are seeing states that are putting in place strategies, whether that's thinking about supporting math tutoring, whether that's thinking about statewide acceleration roadmaps and plans for their districts. And so we want to be a good partner in that. Today we'll be kicking off the first of a 5-part series at the Department of Education focused on reading and mathematics and how to help support states and local leaders in fueling this acceleration. And we have an unprecedented amount of funding, right? $130 billion in the American Rescue Plan dollars that we can put to work in partnership with states and districts to that end.
And that was my next question. Money is always an issue.
Right.
Washington legislation, whether it's a student loan administration thing, money is not the issue here. But how do you make sure that money, that $130 billion, is going to be invested wisely and make sure the implementation of it? Because a lot of people think once legislation is passed, well, it's passed, it's done. Yeah. No. That's just really the beginning from the executive branch. Got to implement it. The infrastructure bill is going to take years to.
Right.
The Inflation Reduction Act will take years to implement. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, to your point, this is going to be a long-term recovery, right? I don't think that we are going to see gains overnight coming back from what we've seen in this week's NAEP data. We do need to move with great urgency. We need to sprint toward that recovery. We have 2 years of a window that Congress has provided for expenditure of those ARP dollars. Our administration moved expeditiously to make sure that those dollars were allocated to the state level. And now the work is, beyond that, focusing on what we know works. And the good news is we have a robust evidence base of what works to help support our students in regaining that academic ground. We know that tailored instruction works. We know that the use of formative and diagnostic tools to help identify where students are, and double down on that content to help them regain that ground. We know those strategies work. We know that high dosage tutoring that is a few times a week, at least 30-minute sessions, ideally with an educator, ideally during the school day. Those types of strategies work. So what we've focused on, we've put out 3 handbooks that capture some of that evidence. We've hosted over 36 webinars. And we're kicking off this series today to really be a partner in helping to support our state leaders in that effort. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Every state and every community has to tailor that intervention to the needs of their respective students. But they have the resources, and they have a partner in the Department of Education to try to help get the work done.
We are going to open up to questions a little bit later, so think of your questions, and we'll have people around if you have any. Along those lines, with those webinars, what kind of feedback are you getting?
Yeah.
We're in a bubble here in Washington.
Right.
What are real people saying?
Well, we have to look at the reality, to your point, Bob, on the ground. We're seeing, first, our students facing significant challenges around their social and emotional needs.
Right.
We know that this pandemic took a toll on the whole child, right, and on their well-being. And we also know that our young people are 6 times more likely to access some of the mental health services and the social and emotional supports they need if those are provided in our schools.
6 times more compared to pre-pandemic.
6 times more likely than if they're provided outside of school.
Wow.
So part of our work there and what we're hearing is the urgency around helping to support creating those structures and supporting mental health as a part of the DNA in each and every one of our schools. The other thing that we're hearing, and the challenge I know future panelists here at the event will touch on, is the educator shortage that we have.
Right.
Again, which is sparing no state and community. We're seeing that shortage. It used to be pre-pandemic, most acute in STEM, most acute for teachers of our English language learners, our special education teachers. Today, we're seeing those shortages manifest across all of our states. So there, it's about pioneering new approaches to attract and support a new generation of teachers in our classrooms. That is the single best resource that we can give our young people for their academic success as a great teacher.
It's a tough question because it's complicated and there's no magic wand, but how do you deal with that? How do you fix that? I mean, you have an aging population in the United States right now overall. How do you replace those teachers? And obviously some governors talk about paying them more.
Right. Well, we're encouraged by what we're seeing across the states and in districts around use of these ARP dollars to that end. So we are seeing some districts and states raise teacher salaries, provide bonuses for retention. We're also seeing new pathways into the profession, right? So there are states that are, we've partnered with our Department of Labor to provide a new model and a new roadmap around utilizing the apprenticeship model to help attract a new set of talent into the profession, pay them while they're being trained, right, and help them move toward licensure and certification to be able to serve our students. That's a type of approach we probably wouldn't have considered pre-pandemic, but is a new and more innovative way of how we think of some of your grow your own programs, right, that we're seeing take off in communities around the country to help address some of these challenges.
It's since March of 2020 when things shut down. I remember talking to a top lawmaker on one of the committees, and I said, how long is this going to last? When are things going to get better?
Right.
This is someone who was briefed, by classified, and his answer was, we'll be fine in a couple weeks. That didn't pan out. So, this challenge from the states, are they nervous when you talk to state officials? Because this has obviously never happened, and the programs that are being put in place have never been implemented. So is there some people really needing help to do this the right way?
Well, I think it is, I don't know about nervous, but I think there is definitely a sense of urgency. And what we're seeing is an openness to trying new things and to trying to re-examine the evidence around what we know works to help support students' academic growth, right? So that's refreshing. We're also seeing partnerships in ways we haven't seen before, right? So President Biden challenged us earlier this year to meet a new goal of 250,000 mentors, tutors, coaches that can support our educators in the system around supporting students, right? And over 60 nonprofit organizations and partners have answered that call, working with their local officials and their districts to try to meet that charge. So that's been really encouraging too. We know we definitely can't go back to the old playbook, right? Being able to accelerate the recovery at the pace that we need to, and to use this opportunity to re-envision, right? So we're not going back to more of the same,
right.
But we're actually being able to think about how are we utilizing technology in new ways coming out of this pandemic, for instance.
You got to look at the positives in some of this stuff.
Right, yeah. That's right. And I think we're seeing our educators and our principals and our system leaders and our state leaders really trying to reach forward and lean into some of these new, more innovative approaches.
Last question from me, at least for now, until open up for questions. You've been in education a long time, worked on Capitol Hill.
Right.
Can you just describe the changing dynamic of the education field, both policy-wise, but also politically? It's so hypercharged right now.
Yeah, right. You know, we are in such a unique moment, Bob, in the moment we're in, with respect to confronting some of the product of this pandemic, the challenges that it brought, you know, the inequities that it exacerbated in communities. We know our underserved communities have been hardest hit. And we're managing the duality of that with the politics that you mentioned of the moment, right, which are playing out in communities and school board rooms across the country. The important thing here is to remain focused on what we know works and remain focused on the well-being of our kids, right? And whether that's in red states or blue states, when you peel away those politics, some of those louder, more divisive debates that often we see fueled here in Washington, and you get down to the local level and you talk to principals and you talk to teachers about what they're doing and what works, they're not thinking about whether that's a conservative strategy or progressive strategy. They're thinking about that in terms of like, how do I, you know, reinvigorate instruction to support my students? How do I build partnerships with our parents? Right, we're seeing, you know, new narratives that are trying to divide our parents from our teachers when, in fact, we know actually our school principals, our system leaders, and our parents are on the same page about what they want for students. You know, they want them to be safe, they want them to be healthy, they want them to learn. Right, they want to focus on the work of this recovery. Right, so we have to, I think, return back to you know, some of those perspectives at the local level, cut through some of the bigger politics that we're seeing in the moment.
Let me open up to questions. If you have any, if you can please wait for the mic to get to you and then identify yourself and ask your question. Not too long. You know, brief questions are good.
Thanks so much. Zach Curtis from the Association for Career and Technical Education. Just yesterday I was visiting Jackson Reed High School and their CTE program, which was really an incredible thing to see on the ground. But there were three things that they really talked about as issues that they're facing, both from the students and the teachers. One being the shortage of industry professionals that can come into the classroom and teach. Another was career counselors, having the right ratios so that they can really do the job well. And the other being materials, AV equipment for the classes of filming and things of that nature, antigen tests in their biomedical program. So I guess for those three things, teachers, counselors, and materials, what would be the administration's strategy to make sure that we can deliver high quality CTE?
Well, thank you, Zach, for the question. I will say we need to be investing more in our career and technical education programs across the country. Right, these strategies to engage our young people earlier in pathways toward college, post-secondary education, and careers are critical for their future. Our norm in our high schools today, we wait far too long before we have that conversation with our young people about what comes next, about their future, and about giving them agency in how they engage and learn new skills and plan for that future. So we know those programs work well. I'm encouraged by some of the application of these ARP dollars, right? These recovery dollars to support those types of pathways. Colorado, for instance, is doing some really innovative and exciting work around doubling down there. We will be, as a department, issuing some new guidance and some more direction for our states around how to utilize ARP dollars to support career pathways. And we're pursuing more increases with our budget, with the President's FY23 budget. One of those proposals is a career-connected high school program, right? How can we think about, this moment to redesign and re-envision what our high schools look like and provide opportunities for that career counseling and for advanced coursework and college credit and work experience for each and every one of our students who wants it in our schools. So that's our vision, and we're working hard with Congress to try to see what we can get done with that in the next budget cycle.
Hi, Jen Krajewski from Proven Tutoring at Johns Hopkins University. We're curious, what is the administration's strategy in encouraging districts and schools to monitor the implementation of their evidence-based intervention and then evaluating it to make sure it's getting kids to grade level, that students are attending their tutoring sessions? How can we support schools in that?
Absolutely. So, we have at the national level, we have a data portal and a hub where we're, in touch with states every day around reporting with respect to their data and the use of those ARP dollars. So that's one place where we can go, and we have fantastic partners across the nonprofit sector that are doing really great work, including the collaborative to help support and aggregate what we know works to help our local leaders lead in this pandemic. We're also, providing resources at the department, right? So as I mentioned, we have 3 handbooks that we've released. Just this week, we've released a new guide around accelerated instruction and accelerated learning. And then, our districts and our principals need partners in helping to support evaluating and supporting the implementation of that in real time. So I know a lot of district leaders are doing that. We've talked to many of our large urban districts who have stood up new infrastructures to support some of that R&D and evaluation, but much more is needed on that front. Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Duran Gresham, George Washington University. What do you need from schools of education?
Yes.
What should schools of education stop doing immediately? And what are the best ways for us to collaborate with school districts to access funding and give the schools what they need?
Yes. Prior to this pandemic, we had already started to see a decline, unfortunately, in the number of candidates in our teacher pipeline at our schools of education. We were seeing hundreds of thousands of fewer, about a third fewer over the course of a decade prior to this pandemic than we had seen before. So what we really need from our schools of education, a few things. Stepping up to say, teaching is for you. This is a place where you can come, you can grow, we will help support your path into the field. We also need change. To be honest, we need to approach this challenge with some new methods and some new strategies, because we know that traditional pathway, the way it looked prior to the pandemic, that will not yield what we need relative to our teaching workforce. So we need that openness, that willingness to partner more closely with our school districts, right, to stand up, grow your own programs, to support programs like teacher residency models that actually follow our teachers beyond leaving their school of education, actually can help follow and support them in their induction into the profession, support as mentors to those teachers early in the profession. So some of those new approaches, new ideas, it's not business as usual for our schools of education, but it's so important for the success of the profession over the long term. And we believe our schools of education play an important role. They are the forefront, and they can be at the forefront of that innovation. Yeah. Thank you.
Hey, last question up here. You can make it brief.
Hello, Elizabeth Primus with the National Newspaper Publishers Association. You mentioned tutoring in school, and I am wholeheartedly supportive of that. I worked in D.C. public schools, retired after 33 years. The problem we had was tutors wanting to take over the classroom teacher's instructional time. How do we mesh tutors who are supporting and helping accelerate kids when kids are being pulled out of their English or math classes and are not getting introduced to the new material while they're overtaking past material?
Right. Well, the first thing we need to do is make sure that our teachers continue to stay in the driver's seat in terms of supporting the content and instruction as the primary teacher and the primary deliverer of that content for our students. Right? As I mentioned before, there is no substitute, there is no shortcut to a great teacher at the head of every classroom to help support our students thriving and recovering. At the same time, we know we need more adults, not fewer adults. We need more relationships, not fewer relationships. What the pandemic taught us is that in the absence of those relationships and that support, not just academically, but socially and emotionally, those connections matter for our students. They mattered before the pandemic. They certainly were strained during the pandemic, particularly as, we were at the end of the 2019-2020 school year, we had all of our students, at home, right? We only had about 27% of our schools open for in-person learning that following school year in the fall. So that took a toll. So we need to double down in reinforcing and reinvigorating those relationships. And that includes with our teachers, it includes with our tutors, our counselors, our social workers. We have a lot of work to do. Our coaches, we can all play a role here in supporting student success. That's really the spirit behind the President's Charge and the National Partnership for Student Success. That is something I want to encourage everybody to take a look at because it's a way to answer the call in this recovery for tutors and others that are in the community to step up and say, how can I help? How can I support these young people alongside their teachers and their principals in the recovery?
Well, that 20 minutes went very fast.
Yeah, sure
Please
did,
thank
Bob.
Roberto
Thank
for
you.
joining
Great
us
to
this
be with
morning.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.